Good morning and a very warm welcome on behalf of the European Forest Coalition and FAM to this discussion on building the bioeconomy together as we consider how a new bioeconomy strategy and the Clean Industrial Deal can reinforce Europe's competitiveness and climate ambitions. My name is Jackie Davis. I will have the privilege of moderating our discussions this morning. We're going to have two very interactive panels later on. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you would like to ask a question of our panel during the discussion, we will be displaying a Slido code. You all know the drill now. You just scan that code and you can write your question, or if you are here in the room with us, we can do it the old-fashioned way. You raise your hand and I will come amongst you with the microphone. My only request is, however you intervene in the discussion, you are brief so I can squeeze as many of you in as possible. And if you wish to share on social media some of the issues we are discussing this morning, and we do encourage you to do so, we suggest you use the hashtag building the bioeconomy together. But it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Håkan Buska, who is the CEO of FAM, to kick us off and open proceedings more formally. Håkan, thank you for having us, and over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everyone. Interesting morning, isn't it? Dear Director General Kerstin Jorna, distinguished panelists, friends and guests, thank you for taking your time to come to this seminar. I represent the Wallenberg family and their private holding company, not listed, owned by the Wallenberg Foundation. And the Wallenberg Foundation, more than 100 years ago, put all their fortune into foundation that should not be mixed up with things that you can withdraw money from for private use. So all the money coming from the dividend in all our companies goes to those foundations for basic research and the well-being of human being. That's the whole idea. So talking about forest, and if we go back a couple of years, when we had the start really of this group together here and the Forest Coalition, when we had a new strategy for forest coming out from Mr. Timmerman, we also find out that we're lacking research, facts. Therefore, we have started now a program with 50 PhDs in Sweden to really making research that we can have facts and figures and something that could be scrutinized when it comes to modern or forestry, when it comes to biodiversity, but also how forests capture CO2. There are so many things out there, but there are a lot of ideas that have not been scrutinized. So that's something we're putting 250 million euros the next years from our foundations into that. This is our third seminar, and for me it's extremely important. I think it's rather fascinating that we have been able to come together with 10 member countries, Sweden, of course, Finland, Austria, Poland, Germany, France, Estonia, Slovenia, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. The interesting thing, of course, being together and discussing this type of question is that one size doesn't fit all. It's totally different to own forest and taking care of forest in the northern part of Sweden compared to the southern part of Spain. And I think that's also an important part of our coalition to figure that out. But we have one thing in common, and that's the good thing with the tree fiber. That could be a big part of the transition to a more sustainable living around the world, but also in Europe. But could also increase our productivity and efficiency within the Union. Of course, seeing the result, even though it lacking one electoral vote in United States for Trump, he has 269 and they need 270, he probably will win. That means probably increased tariffs for us, and our competitiveness within EU will be even more under pressure compared to previous time, and be lacking behind when it comes to productivity and efficiency in our union due to different things. And we can be a part of that solution, the forest owners and this group of the coalition, and utilizing the tree fiber to increase our productivity and also do the green transition. I think that's even more important now, because with all the things that at least we have done in the Wallenberg sphere to try to figure out if Harris win or Trump win, the American First Act that basically have been there since 1930, don't forget about that, but it will increase, and we will see tariffs and more a protectionistic world in front of us. So I think we need to be more innovative. So it's crystal clear for me that increase competitiveness in everything that we do, and at the same time do the green transition as an extremely important thing. You will find, and you probably find it already, a report that the coalition had brought forward, looking like this. If you're not sitting on it, you can. I think it's rather interesting because there are 12 policy proposals and redefining long-life products, defining sustainable managed forest, phasing out fossil subsidies, and suggest the appointment of forest advisor in the commission president. And we think, and the coalition think, this is a very important input for the Clean Industrial Deal, the Circular Economy Act, and the revised bioeconomy strategy. Because what we're going to discuss here today is more than forest, it's the bioeconomy and how we can utilize that for transition and increase productivity. But it's also another thing, if we look into that, it's also a question in this really difficult time with the uncertainty of the political landscape around the world, with wars close to our borders. The green transition, utilizing forest fiber, could also be something that enhance our security and security of supply with fuels, for example, but also other things that we are depending on from other countries. One question is, of course, how we can be an equal or have the right competitive landscape when it comes to fossil products compared to a bioeconomy that is fossil-free. And there are still a lot of subsidies in the fossil industry, and we think that is not something that gains the productivity and the efficiency in our part of the world. So I'm really very much looking forward to this discussion today, and it's even more important than we thought when we discussed or decide on this event with the things that is happening around the world. So please welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. And a stark reminder there of the backdrop against which we are having our discussions, the challenge ahead, and the crucial question of how we couple that vital transformation and transition with that competitiveness agenda that has now become so central to the Commission's objectives. So a perfect place to introduce Kerstin Jona, Director General in the Directorate General for Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs, better known to most of us in Brussels as DG GROW from the Commission. Kerstin, thank you so much for being with us today. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me into the forest. If I look around, it looks like Christmas already. And, you know, picking up on what you said, a stark reminder, I would say a starch reminder, because that's what bioeconomy also is about. Thank you very much for inviting me to discuss how to strengthen the competitiveness of the European forest-based industries. And they are at the heart of the European bioeconomy. And thank you for this, because this will be very useful in our work also on the Clean Industrial Deal. I would like to focus my intervention on how the European forest-based bioeconomy can remain competitive and deliver green growth, but even more so, how you can help others to be competitive and deliver green growth. Because there's a lot of solutions that we haven't used so far. When we talk about bioeconomy, I retain a visit in a protein kind of facility, and they showed us a cow. You show us a tree, they showed us a cow. And I said, this cow is a bioreactor, only not a very efficient one, if you compare it to enzymes and the input they need to produce 1 kilo of protein. So how can we be better even than nature? The potential of the market is beyond doubt. The recent McKinsey study estimates that the use of industrial biotechnology to produce biomaterials and biochemicals will lead to potential revenues between 70 and 100 billion US dollars in 2040. And compared to 41 billion dollars in 2022, that's a very big increase. I see this as also expressing the potential of high innovation in around the industries, and I do thank you for getting the facts and figures right and investing such an amount of money into 50 PhDs. I'd be very happy to meet them once, because it's only if you have the right facts and figures that you can do good policies, and this is the basis for all. So thank you for that. So we need to analyze how the forest-based sectors can tap further into the potential of biotechnology and deliver growth, for example, by using biocatalysis to accelerate chemical reactions needed in certain manufacturing processes. And that brings me to my next point, which is about the business case for biomanufacturing. We need to make sure that we do not lose sight of future biomanufacturing in Europe, only if it is for pharmaceuticals, because we cannot be dependent. We already have strong domestic supply of renewable materials, such as wood. We also have a highly productive forest-based sector that brings 620 billion euro annual turnover to the European economy and provides employment. You provide employment for almost 4 million citizens. In 2020, because we asked that question, also facts and figures, the JRC counted 2,362 facilities within the EU that use biomass for product manufacturing, so-called biorefineries. Roughly 45% of those produce traditional forest-based products, such as pulp and paper, timber. Only 144 of those refineries, that's 6%, use woody biomass to produce novel bio-based chemicals and composites. Only about 3/4 of those refineries qualify as commercial today. So there's more to do to actually build their business case and to pull them up. I do see a lot of untapped potential here. The recent study commissioned by AFRI shows that the additional material substitution effect through storing carbon in products and substitution of fossil fuels in products could be as big as 272 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2050. That's huge. But how do we best achieve green growth through biomanufacturing and these new solutions? I'd have 4 points on this. The first is that we need to ensure a strong and continuous supply of the necessary feedstocks. This can happen by extending our renewable material base through afforestation, reforestation activities, but even more so by making sure that renewable feedstocks we use, especially wood, are used efficiently and circular. Too much wood that could be used for materials, around 50%, is still currently be burned. Second, we need to have a clear understanding of the kind of novel bio-based applications that can help us to defossilize our economy. Everything all at once is not feasible. We need clear business cases that focused on the biggest substitution potential. Do we scale up biotextiles, bioplastics, lignine batteries, or use more wood in construction? The forest-based value chain with its different upstream and downstream industries is closely intertwined. Every decision you make about the business cases of the future will have consequences for the whole value chain. And it's important to keep the whole value chain in our focus. I also want to say a word about industrial venture. What we see today is that these new solutions, they are the kind of completely different track and production. And we have a lot of solutions on this. And they can be scaled, and they do scale. What's not really scaling is the new solutions inside existing processes. For example, in the chemical industry. And this is because the connection between the innovation part and the industrial venture uptake into existing processes, not new processes and new products, is too slow. So this is really where also in our debates on the competitiveness fund, we will try to focus more, work more with the current industries to find solutions. And I don't know to what extent your work with a group of PhDs is looking into this as well, but how to scale this into the existing industrial processes, the existing industrial base, is a point for attention. My third point is, I started already on the need to attract more private capital and match it with public investments. The forest-based bioeconomy offers green growth free of strategic dependencies, and we think that should yield high investment rewards. Again, around the competitiveness fund and the thinking when we look at InvestEU today, how it works, is that we need to pursue on the de-risking logic. And we need to pursue on the logic that in the life of an innovation cycle and of an investment journey of a company, innovative company, you need different types of money at different stages. In the beginning, you need grants because nobody believes in you. Then, you start, maybe have a patent. Then you need equity to actually demonstrate, to build the proof that it actually can work. And when you have advanced on that, then you need different money, more money, bigger tickets in size for kind of developing, bringing it to the market, the scale-up capital. And this is where many companies actually leave Europe because they don't find that. This was very much highlighted in both the Draghi report and the Letta report, that when it comes to the still very risky, too risky for banks, scale-up tickets, we need to be better so that companies can actually find that in Europe. And then, of course, there's the introduction into the market. And then there's a whole issue about discoverability, which also in the bio area is very important, because today it's not easy to discover or to understand, also from a consumer point of view, the bio premium in the product, where it comes from. So we will need to work on that as well, which is the introduction into the market. And this is actually my fourth point, that if the production and if the new product, the equivalent product, is more expensive, then there is still an issue about, the fossil-based version. Look at plastic, for example. So if you cannot distinguish whether the plastic is bio-based or fossil-based, why should you pay a higher price, even a small higher price? So this is what we have to improve as well in our regulatory framework. And that brings me to my last point, the need to reinforce the bioeconomy's industrial dimension, and it links to biotechnology and to biomanufacturing to contribute to a stronger and more resilient European economy. The revised bioeconomy strategy will go hand in hand with several other initiatives that are already announced in the political guidelines for the next Commission: the Clean Industrial Deal for competitive industries, an Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act, a Circular Economy Act, and a European Biotech Act. taking inspiration from the Net Zero Industry Act, and the Critical Raw Materials Act, which were kind of the first of their kind, we need to make sure that we cover the 4 access dimensions if you want to have a good business case. Access to operations, that's the licensing part, the permitting. It shouldn't take too long. It shouldn't be too complicated. You need predictability for investors. The access to funding part, to financing, to de-risking. In Net Zero Industry Act, and Critical Raw Materials Act, we have the category of strategic projects that have a kind of hyper rapid access to national and EU funding. Then the access to skills. You need people to actually do this, and sometimes these skills are new to develop. Only in the battery sector, for example, we're lacking several 100,000 of skilled workers to build the batteries of the future. And then there is access to the market part, which I already mentioned. We will work and continue to work on those. And just for uplifting, after the initial remarks, you made the very initial remarks, I want to quote one example, which we are actually also supporting with our joint undertaking. It's Woodcell, which develops viable bio-based alternatives to fossil-based materials in the chemical and materials industries. And the project will turn hardwood residues into microscale, microcrystalline cellulose, MCC, for those who know, for a wide array of applications. And that will help to reduce global dependence on fossil-based chemicals and create new job opportunities. I'm very much looking forward. I'll have to leave you, unfortunately, after, but I'm very much looking forward to the reports from your discussions, because I think there is a great opportunity to seize here, and we have to seize it. That's no question. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kirsten, and thank you for ending us on a positive, uplifting note in these challenging times. So let me bring our panel up. Delighted to welcome Mette Karlin McVeigh, Senior Vice President, Corporate Affairs at Stora Enso. A very warm welcome to you, Mette. To Alexandre Pacaud, Director, Innovation for a Low Carbon Resilient Economy in the Directorate General for Climate Action in the Commission, better known to us as Klima. Very warm welcome, Alexandre. And Pep Pitk, who is Chief Development Officer and member of the Management Board at Fibonol. A very warm welcome to all of you. So a reminder, the Slido code should appear on the screen at intermittent intervals. If you wish to ask a question, please, you can write it there, or later on I will come amongst you with the microphone. But this is an entirely interactive conversation. I've asked our panel not to make any opening remarks. We are going to dive straight in. So, Mette, if I could just turn to you first in terms of when we say, why does substitution matter? Can we just be clear before we go any further? What, in your eyes, are we talking about when we talk about substitution?
So substitution is basically just replacing fossil-intensive materials and fossil fuels. So this wood beam, instead of using steel, you use a wooden beam. I brought this along and I saw that people said something similar. You know, instead of using fossil graphite in batteries, you can use this powder, which is basically a boiled down lignin, which is sort of the glue in the tree. So it's using, you know, paper packaging instead of plastics. So all of these, it's basically replacing. But I would boil it down to something even simpler than that. It's just about the need to stop using fossil materials and fossil fuels, and the need for us to start living above the ground instead of digging into it. And so, you know, in a way, the substitution effect is not a potential, it's a must. We have to do this. We have to transition to a circular bio-based economy, which is resource efficient, because that will make the EU it will increase EU sovereignty, it will increase our competitiveness, and our climate neutrality, as we heard from.
So you see those twin objectives as very much, this is substitution is one way to achieve both objectives simultaneously. So you say it's not potential, it's a must. But nevertheless, in terms of the concrete contribution it can make, can we put any numbers on it? What is the scale of that untapped potential?
I mean, it is huge, and it's much greater. I mean, I don't have there is a good report from FAM, for example, on AFRI, so I can't read off all the numbers, but it is huge. And the more interesting thing, I think, is that it's greater than the forest sink. So it's greater than just leaving the forest to grow, because at one point the forest will start getting old and it will start emit. So it's all about balancing this and making sure that you harvest at the optimum time, and that you use it for, products that are good and that are recycled and reused.
Thank you. So, Alexandre, in terms of the potential and how you see it, and as I say, in terms of both objectives, both meeting our sustainability goals, our economic transformation goals, but also the competitiveness goals, and whether you think at the moment we are doing enough to realise that potential. Kirsten outlined some areas for action that she saw. How do you see it?
Yeah, good question. And just to start by saying, even whatever happens on the side of the Atlantic, EU will stay the course on climate action, because it is not just important for climate, but it's also essential for our competitiveness. I think it was said it very well by Kerstin Jorna a minute ago. And there we see the bioeconomy playing a central role. And that needs to increase if we look at what we need to do by 2040, by 2050 to reach climate neutrality. Bioeconomy needs to step up. And maybe if you were asking for numbers, I can maybe also drop some numbers into the discussion. If we look at 2040, for instance, we would need 400 million tons of removals. And a large majority of it will be removals in the sphere of biogenic carbon, so land-based solutions, nature-based solutions. Some will be technical removals with the bio-CCS, but a lot will be also in forest and in products. So substitution will be absolutely key and part of this puzzle of what are the policy that we need to put in place. And it is about, as Mette was saying, substituting fossil-based materials like we have in buildings, but it is also creating new markets for the use of biogenic carbon. Because a carbon-neutral world that we want is not a world without carbon. It is a world without fossil carbon. So we need to find ways that biogenic carbon becomes a very important feedstock for plastic, for chemicals, for textile, and so on. And there is a huge business opportunity, I would say, for the forestry sector that you represent here. And we are very much into our policy thinking, looking at how this can best be done. But I'm sure we will get to that questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Alexandre. So, Pep, just complete the picture in terms of the importance of what we're talking about. Alexandre there saying it is an absolutely key part of the puzzle. How great do you see that potential of your sector in this area? And do you think we're doing enough now to realise that? Or do we need to rethink things?
I think we need to start going from thinking to real action. And for me, it's not about the substitution. It's rather a question of switch and the speed of the switch. Because in the end, if we think about the industry, if we think about everything we do within the planetary boundaries concept, well, we are way outside of that. So now we need to come back within the planetary boundaries, and then it's a question how we can do it. So for me, there are two definitions that need to be kind of decoupled a bit, and I see it in many discussions. So decarbonization, we need to decarbonize fuels and energy, but we cannot decarbonize materials and chemicals. So there we need the defossilization. And today, a lot of discussion, if we talk about the CO2 emissions, we talk about scope 1 and 2 because it's easy, it's comfortable. So energy and the fuels we have been long talking about, we have some solutions there, we have the support scheme there. But scope 3, guys, that's the scope 1 and 2 is the top of the iceberg, scope 3 is the real iceberg, and that's the extent of the problem that we really need to take it in our face. So, what are the solutions there? We want to keep the virgin fossil under the ground. What options do we have? We have biomass, so whatever kind of biomass. We need to agree what is sustainable harvesting or what is the sustainable extraction of biomass region by region. But we need to agree on that. I think one delusion that we have is everybody's talking about waste-based bioeconomy. Forget it. Waste-based, we do nothing. Waste-based is already used. We need sustainable biomass that we can use for building the new economy. And the other option is CO2. But CO2-based economy, guys, we need 20, 30 years before we get any kind of scale there. So today is the matter of how we get the technology on the market. And the third one is recycling. But the issue with the recycling of the fossil is that the whole system is not designed to be recycled. So we need to rethink the whole fossil, how we produce the fossil-based products to be ready for recycle. And then combining all these three things, we need level playing field. So we have been now 8 years or so on the market. There is two value of tests. First one is the technology, and in EU we're very good in supporting R&D and the kind of first scale up. But then you get on the top of the Everest, and then comes the commercialization, regulation, and financing, and that's the graveyard. That's the graveyard today. All the new innovation is left alone.
Okay, let's come back on that if we can during our discussion. But in broad terms, you've highlighted those three key areas. Let me therefore ask you, do you think at the moment EU policies are fit for purpose, if I can put it that way, to address those three key issues? Or do we need to tinker or have more radical change to really take account of this absolutely key part of the puzzle?
So how blunt can I be? I think the chemical materials, so we have I think there is a very good regulation in place showing where we should go with the refuel Europe aviation and maritime. We have the value-based, what kind of feedstock are okay, what comply with this regulation, and then you have very year after year increasing mandates that you need to meet. For the chemical materials industry, scope 3 emissions, there is exactly zero regulative support. It's just based on the industries and where the market little bit demands, but we cannot speed up innovation like this. We cannot speed the commercialization of new products against the old one. And that's where we need really fast. Yesterday, we need regulation like refuel Europe aviation.
Thank you. Mette, you wanted to react to that? I think it's difficult because there's no one silver bullet that will solve everything. And I think that's why we need to start the bioeconomy and decoupling growth from fossil feedstocks is something that needs to underpin all legislation. So, you know, again, the lignin, the glue in the tree, it can replace, you know, fossil glues. So we can make renewable glues now. And fossil glues is a huge emissions from that. So, you know, we need to look into REACH because, you know, the chemicals used to create these fossil glues, are they needed? You know, can we look into REACH, the REACH restrictions around that? Another strange, not strange, but sort of what you don't think of when you see a forest, you don't automatically think about the food contact materials legislation. But again, that's legislation set up basically for plastics, for the fossil traditional incumbent products. So can we make sure that we underpin the impact assessments for all legislation now coming in to make sure, how does this hit on fossils? How does this hit on renewables? Are we enabling a bioeconomy with this legislation? And are we really staying true to polluter pays? Are fossils coming up on top?
And another issue really linked to something that Håkan said when he talked about no one size fits all.
Yeah.
You talk about impact assessment. Clearly, when it comes, different forests, very different management systems and so on. So very different impacts. And are we taking enough account when you look at impacts on the different impacts in different ecosystems? But Alexander, a reaction from you to, I'm sensing, let me put it politely, an air of frustration about whether we are getting this right or not.
No, it's not frustration, it's hope. Because I think we have in front of us a new policy cycle where, as Mette was saying, we are going to look at many policy areas, and that's the moment where we can really put these questions at the center. And I was just listing them before joining you. There is the Clean Industrial Deal, the Vision for Agriculture, the Circular Economy Act, the Bioeconomy Strategy, the Chemicals Package, the next MFF, so the big EU budget discussion, the post-2030 climate legislation. So all of that, is a vehicle for addressing what we are looking at today. And it will really require looking at all of this in a very consistent and coherent way. And if I may just come with one particular wish and one must that we have on our table is to get the MRV right. Who knows what MRV means? 1, 2, 3. Oh my God. We need to explain better what it is. Monitoring, reporting, and verification. Data. We need to be able to show that what matters, what is being done on the ground, in the forest, in the chemical sector, in the biochemical sector, is being accounted, measured, verified. This is a must. All climate policies start with that. And if you don't get that right, then you can't get the policy right and the incentive and the economic incentive right and so on. So this is really something that we are looking at very, very deeply. I think we are starting to have solutions. I can go a bit deeper into that if you want. But it is a must.
And that, of course, is the objective of the carbon removal certification framework, for example. How do you see the potential impact of that? And what is the challenge to get this? I now know it has an acronym. I didn't know it had an acronym. But what is the challenge to get the MRV right?
Yeah, so a second question to the audience. CRCF, who knows what it means?
This is an acronym class.
That's good. CRCF, Carbon Removal Certification Framework. Carbon removal, I think you all understand what it is. Certification, so we need to certify. And it's a framework because it covers a number of activities in the field. And this is something that has been approved by Council and Parliament very recently, and now we are implementing that. And one of the key first thing that we need to do is, you were saying we need a level playing field. Yes, so we need standardized methodologies on how we monitor and assess and verify these emission removals in products. And that's something that we are doing in DG Climate together with others and with you, stakeholders, member states. It's a big process. We've been talking a lot about taxonomy, but we think it's a bit like taxonomy, but in terms of having the right data flow in place.
Pep, in terms of whether you think that framework, what impact it could have, how important it might be, but more broadly going back to your level playing field point, I mean, Håkan mentioned in his opening remarks the issue of subsidies to the fossil industry. What for you is the key to having a genuinely level playing field within Europe and also, of course, globally? We had mentioned earlier of tariffs and the risk of what that might mean for us. How do you see really delivering a level playing field for the sort of products that you are producing in this tough environment?
Well, I agree fully with this traceable, trackable transparency of the value chains, because this is in the end key. And I see here is a lot of challenge. And again, I think we need to kind of pivot the mindset, because all the new innovation of the bio-based solutions we want it to be ideal from the first moment. So how we measure it, minimize the CO2, holistic approach on the LCAs, all the biodiversity effects, water effects, etc., etc. And at the same time, you start asking the questions from the existing industry, fossil-based industry. I think the best case example that we have is the same lignin can replace today to a certain extent, but I think in 2030 all the bitumen in the roads. Let's say basically we can make fossil-free roads. Today we can make net zero roads. And what it's all about is CO2. How we measure the CO2 and how we report it. So we have done LCA, ISO standard-based LCA from cradle to gate, taking everything into account, scope 1, scope 3, and we have the number. How much what is the biogenic and what is the operational CO2. And we have been competing against the bitumen fossil-based resource, and they have claimed for a very long time that their CO2 footprint average in Europe is 150 kilograms CO2 per ton. Ridiculous number, but that's the official number. And now they made a revision. And the revision said, oh, we looked here and looked there, and now it's 750. So it's not 5% difference, it's 5 times difference. And this is kind of a basis how we need to compete with the new solutions against the existing ones. So that's one of the playing field. And I think the comparison, everybody's asking, okay, how is the price parity with the fossils? How is the CO2? But I think we need to generate totally different playing field and a kind of a deregulation zone. If we want innovation to get on the market, it's step by step. We are in the infancy. Don't regulate the innovation into death. Let's grow together. Let's learn together, and then come back.
So the concept, for example, of regulatory sandboxes, something we need to play. I'll give you a chance to react in a moment, Alexandra. But from your point of view, Meta, and in terms of really driving that continuous innovation, you are a sector that is hugely innovative already. But how can policy is it really shaped in the way that will drive that? And the crucial issue, if we want to attract the private investment that Kirsten underlined was so crucial, that level playing field issue, for you, what's the key? And then I'll ask Alexandra to react. Already see some questions coming in, and I'll come out to all of you.
Well, I'll bring in a new angle that it's not only about innovation, it's about scaling up. Because, we have the innovations. It's about getting the first, second, third, and fourth customer to use this instead of, fossil graphite. It's about, wood construction. It was invented a long time ago, but still it's only, depending on which figure you use, between 2.5 to 5% of the construction industry is wood. That's mind-boggling. So we need these obligations, mandates, yes, but also sort of the green public procurement rules. They need to be strong for renewable materials. We also need renewable sustainable criteria in everything from eco-design to REACH to packaging to everything. And it started with all of the construction in the past mandate. The construction regulation have started doing this by sort of measuring the LCAs from cradle to grave and bringing it down. But we need that kind of thinking in all legislation.
Yeah.
And there is, in fact, a question from Nicolas Fuentes, who asks, what sort of incentives would be most effective in scaling up the use of biomass in materials? Would mandates like in the Renewable Energy Directive be a key one? Is that part for you of the solution? And then, Alexandra, I'll give you a chance to answer on that. What sort of incentives are really going to address this scale-up issue?
Well, that's part of it, but the Renewable Energy Directive is only one piece of the puzzle, and it's also energy, and that's where it's also important that, you know, at the end of a renewable lifetime, we don't just burn it, we recycle it. So for packaging, for example, that, you know, we can't recycle what's not collected, and to collect something, we need proper sorting of the packaging. So, you know, small thing, but it would be good if the EU put an obligation on member states that you have to sort packaging waste in, you know, to make that. So it's a plethora of things needed on both the demand side and the supply side. So on demand side, yes, like you said, we need to grow more forests and replant and plant in new areas, trees. We need better recycling from everything from, you know, these beams to food packaging. We need to make sure that the forest is not just seen as a sink. It shouldn't be used to offset fossils. Every sector needs to do their own thing.
Thank you. Alessandra, let me also throw, so there was that question from the audience and another question about de-risking from Oliver Kay, who says, de-risking is not just about capital risk, it's regulatory risk. Whenever a directive such as the RED or the EUDR is revised, capital investments in large projects slows. Can you confirm, asked Oliver, the Commission will focus on implementation? So I don't know whether you want to pick up on that, but also please react to what Pep and Meta have said.
I can be very fast on this first point. Yes, implementation is a must, and I think it has been already very well explained in all the missions letter and in the political guidelines. Business needs stability, needs long-term predictability. Yes, so this is a key, I would say, priority for us. Maybe I would like to come back on these questions of how do we create a market for all of that? Yeah. Because I think this, we know it exists, it can be scaled up, but how do we create a market? And there I would like to come back on what I said initially. MRV is first, you remember, monitoring, reporting, verification. But another very important element is that you certify and you create credits for what you do. So it's kind of a, for instance, you have stored the carbon in these beams, correct? You do that. It's great for the planet. It's super. But how much carbon is being stored, right? And this is going to be what we do with the carbon removal certification framework. So once you do that, you get a certificate that this is how much carbon is stored in my product, how long it will last. And this has a value. Because in our future economy, climate neutral economy, stakeholders in the business are looking for ways to reduce their scope 3 emissions. You are very much on that. There is even now a reporting obligation called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that requires large companies to report on their scope 3 to the investors. So they will have to demonstrate that somehow with time they reduce emissions or including their scope 3. So for that, they need to show that in their value chain, they are investing in the right stuff. So instead of building only with steel or cement, wood is going to store carbon. So that's, we think, a very important element to start creating this market, to really have these units, as we have the carbon price for emissions in the air, we'll have also units to certify the carbon that is removed.
Pep, did you want to react to that in terms of that key question of how do we create that market?
I don't want to sound pessimistic, the situation. I would say that the situation in the industry, chemical material industry, we have been now working with them 8 years, trying to put new products on the market, developing the formulations and everything together. I would say that the industry is ready, but they're lacking the incentive, because if they do the step today without the regulation, then they will lose in competition. It's a kind of short-sighted. In the long run, yes, they would learn faster, and when the regulation comes, they would be ready. But most of the industry don't want to make a move before there is a kind of a push to make the move. And that's what I think the value-based public procurement. In my view, we don't need a very detailed regulation. We just need to tell that in the defossilization, we need small, even 0.5% of the market. In 2025, needs to be net zero, third-party verified numbers, and that's it. And if we now show that this will continue, maybe 0.5% a year increase towards 2030, 2040, that's what we need. That's a bit longer view into that there is a market, there is a value-based market where you can play against, in the end, the best cost-efficient sustainable products against the sustainable products, and the market will start innovating, getting cost down. That's what we need.
If I may, so we talk about scope 3, but also, I mean, now we have interesting legislation, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and that requires also to look at the life cycle emission of a building. So here, the real estates will have somehow with time to look at the overall life cycle emissions of the building. So start thinking, is it better to store carbon in my building or to emit because I use a lot of steel and cement? So I think this is coming. I don't say everything is there in terms of the regulatory framework, but the signals are given.
And this, of course, one of the key areas where we see the most potential wood in buildings. Key. Meta, I know you wanted to react. One more question from two relating to the resourcing. One person asking, trees can do anything, but do we have enough resources for substituting everything? Hang on a minute, sorry, it's jumping around. Even with increased resource efficiency, what is the realistic potential for using wood in Europe? And also talking about, do we need to look more to international commodity markets where there are large volumes that can be sourced sustainably? So just going back to the potential issue,
forest company, I should respond.
So that's why I wanted to bring that one to you.
The answer is simple. No, we don't have enough resources. Yes, we have enough resources. I mean, we have enough resources in the way that we need to be more resource efficient. This beam should not be burnt when this when this building is taken down. This beam should be recycled or reused for other products, and that will create that what I said on the supply side. We need more wood availability. So yes, we have enough if we start having a truly circular economy
and use it more, as Kirsten said, use it more efficiently.
Exactly. Yes. So if we use cascading use principles, then yes.
No, I'm fully with you, Meta. But maybe just to also add that we need to look at these new value chains really in a very holistic way. So first, how do we ensure that we have sustainable forestry happening? And there, in our certification framework, we are going to set requirements for that. So it is how the biomass is being produced. It needs to be sustainable. Then how much carbon do we store in products? And we can certify that and create a unit for that. Then once the building is demolished or the plastic pipe come at the end of its life, how do we recycle of that? So how many cycles can we do? And at the end, if we have to incinerate these products, we should capture the CO2 and store it. Because that's the way also...
Or use it for products.
Sorry?
Or use it for products.
Yeah, but at the end, okay, we can recycle many times, but there will be a moment where somehow we have to...
Can I just very briefly throw another acronym? I never know how you pronounce this acronym, whether you say LULUC, LULUC, or whatever. What do you say?
LULUCF.
LULUCF. I love EU acronyms. They're my favourite. The land use change and forestry regulation. There are concerns, Alexandra, just to put to you briefly, that this will mean a decrease in harvesting and therefore increase the supply concern.
No, we don't see it like that. We don't see it like that because we will in particular look, when we will review soon the legislation, how this long life product, so what we talk about now, these products can also be accounted towards the zinc in the LULUCF. So it is not only the forests, but also how the products can be accounted in that.
That is extremely welcome, but I also think, LULUCF also, when we set targets and we review it, we need to take into account that a forest is a very unstable sink, and it shouldn't be used to compensate for other, the forest sink will not be enough. So we need to make sure that the
still a big part of our solution for climate neutrality.
Yeah, it's part of the package. But
Okay,
Yes,
I'd
a big
love,
one.
I'd love this to go on and on, but we
Large
don't
one.
have much time left. I want to give Pep a chance to react, and I want to put you all on the spot. But before I do, taken quite a lot of questions from Slido. Is there a burning question in the room, or are you happy for me to go on grilling our wonderful panel? Okay, let's resume the argument. No, but Pep, a reaction to this conversation, and then we'll come to some priorities for the future.
For me, the LULUCF is. I think we need to have more holistic approach. So we cannot look at the forestry, forest management, what is sustainable. We need to look forest and agriculture at the same time. So we are today having discussions that how we manage forest is bad, and then on the same side we have their monoculture maize growing on the next field, and that's the biodiversity. Where's the biodiversity? We should have a more holistic approach. Natural forest, managed forest, plantations, agricultural plantations, monocultures, and more diverse. So it's all packaged together. In the end, every part has its role. Every part has its different role, but it all needs to be looked at the general, more holistic approach. Regulative side, how to scale up innovation. I think it's for us in the end, it's a question how you make things bankable. To get funding, to scale it up. So large-scale biorefinery, €1 billion investment. So how many companies can do it on the equity base? So we need banks to get in. And what banks want? They want offtake. Again, where you get the offtake from the chemical industry for the large volumes is that you need to have some kind of regulative frame saying that the more sustainable products have a market and they have it on the long run. And for me, what I'm seeing today as we have a platform that can go to energy, fuels, and chemicals and materials, then I see how much effect has had the refuel Europe aviation regulation. The whole value chain has come together. They understand that they don't have other option. They need to start going. 2025 already, they need to have 2% bio-based solutions. And companies from the technology providers, from the raw material suppliers, airplanes, airports, everybody's together. Hey, how we tackle it, how we invest, where are the technologies? It's a puzzle.
We will come back on this in our second panel, but we are almost out of time for this one. And I just want to, so you probably won't like the premise of this question, given that you said there is no silver bullet, and you have underlined how important a holistic approach is. But I'm not really looking to say, okay, what's the one thing we need to do? Because there is no one thing. You've touched on many issues, but a key next step. We're at the start of a new EU legislative cycle. We're at a pivotal moment in all sorts of ways. No one needs reminding of what's happening across the Atlantic again, but for each of you, if you had to identify a key next step to make sure that we realise all this untapped, you said it's not potential, it's a must, but the untapped potential of substitution, and that we really ensure that we build the bioeconomy together and substitution is recognised for what it is. What for each of you is the key next step? What's the first thing we need to do at this pivotal moment? I'm going to come right down the line. I'm going to give Pep, then Alexandra, and then Mette in reverse order to the way I started. Pep, you first.
Show us the target, give us the security that the direction that we have taken is the one, that we want to defossilize, that we want more sustainable products to get on the market. And like I said, the industry is ready to innovate, the industry is ready to scale, but we just need the security to do so.
Thank you. Alexandre.
Help us to define a good MRV. So now you all know what it is, monitoring, reporting, verification. And with that, I think this is the first step to build really incentive schemes and scale up the market.
Thank you very much. Mette, you have the last word.
Well, I would say what we need is really a forest-based industrial bioeconomy strategy, which includes all of the things in this report. We have our own sort of wish list for the next EU Commission with demand side and supply side suggestions, and then put this bioeconomy, industrial bioeconomy strategy into action.
Which is the perfect bridge to our second panel, where we are going to focus, I didn't ask her to do that, focus on the priorities for the new bioeconomy strategy. But first, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed for a great conversation. Thank you so much. You may return to the anonymity of the audience. So, as I say, a perfect bridge there to our next conversation. I was also very struck, Alexandra, talking about all the different things: Clean Industrial Deal, the Circular Economy Act, the new bioeconomy strategy, the MFF. And a big question there, he talked about the need for consistency and coherency. A question there about how do we achieve that? Because it's something we like to talk about at EU level. We don't always have it. And how important will that coherence and consistency be for forest-based industries as we move forward, if again we are going to realise all that untapped potential? So, joining me now for our second panel, I'm delighted to welcome Paula Lehtomäki, who is Director General at the Finnish Forestry Industry Federation. Paula or Paula?
Paula.
Paula, I was right the first time. Very good. Alexander Bernhuber, MEP, member of the European Parliament's Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. A very warm welcome to you, sir. And Karl Anton Prinz du Waldeck und Piemont, Presidium member of AGDW, the Forest Owners in Germany. So, again, like last time, totally interactive conversation. I have some questions for our panel, but please do keep yours coming. I will give you another opportunity if you wish to ask your question later on, but also if you keep them coming in via Slido, via the QR code, we can feed as many of them into the conversation as we can manage in the time available. So, a very warm welcome to all of you. And Alexander, let me come to you first in terms of where we're coming from. So we're at this pivotal moment. We look back on 5 years gone and we look ahead to the next 5 years in EU legislative terms. How do you see the impact of all the raft of initiatives we've already had before, and the challenges for those new initiatives that Alexandra was mentioning just now?
So thank you much for the invitation, and you mentioned it right. We started 5 years ago with the Green Deal, with the big goal how we can get climate neutral till 2050. And I think it's very important to have this deal. What have we done afterwards? We did a lot of strategies. The Commission presented it, we adopted it in the Parliament, and ended up in a lot of new legislation. Taking back, 2,000 new legislative files were coming up in the past 5 years, delegated acts, regulations, and so on. And maybe someone listened yesterday evening to the hearing of our designated Commissioner Roosevelt. She mentioned the past 5 years we had legislation done, and now we have to implement it in the upcoming 5 years. And we have to be so honest what has happened the past 5 years. We did a lot of legislation in a very short time. And we have to be so honest, a lot of legislation was done not very well. Taking, for example, deforestation regulation. Yes, I voted in favor. But yes, I have to say right now, what is on the table right now is not possible to implement it. And if we want to grow bioeconomy with the deforestation regulation, it will lead to less wood possible to produce. Just I'm myself a forest owner. To implement the deforestation regulation right now means I have to track every tree I want to cut and I want to sell. So we lose so many small forest owners because they will say, I don't want to touch my forest anymore because it's much too much bureaucracy. So we have to take really up when we see some of the legislation we made the past few years, to be so honest and have to adopt it.
But why did we get it where you think we got it wrong? Was it because it was done too fast, or because of not doing, which I mentioned earlier, this issue of impact assessment and very different forests with very different needs, situations? Is the problem that we didn't understand the diversity of the sector? Where did we go wrong?
I think there was much too less dialogue between who is affected from this regulation. This was just a regulation done during COVID crisis, where everyone was doing video conversations, and no dialogue with the industry who is really affected, with the forest owners who are really affected. And right now we see the problem. So right now we have to be so honest and make some adjustments in there. That's our work.
Somebody's already thrown in a question saying, how can we avoid that the new policy cycle doesn't end up to just be a fig leaf to cover the embarrassment, says the anonymous questioner, of the previous policies? The Commission is not even able to say how many implementing acts will follow from the Green Deal. Maybe come back. But Paula, just to give us a sense of where you think we are, would you echo what Alexandra said about the past 5 years? And how do you see the challenge ahead as we look to, yes, implementation, but we're talking also about new strategies, new acts, new initiatives as well?
Alexander was talking about the huge amount of legislation that we have received during the last 5 years, in particular legislation that is affecting sustainable forestry. And the biggest problem is that nobody knows that what is the cumulative impact of all this legislation, just to mention that for a start. But where we need a real change is that the last 5 years we have been seeing the role of forests from 3 angles. The role as carbon sequestration, the role in biodiversity, the role in nature restoration. Very important, because sustainable, healthy forest is very much needed for developing bioeconomy. But what we now need to see is forests' role, 4 S's, as a sink, as we were talking in the previous panel, as a carbon storage, also as a sustainable source for carbon which is so much needed, and role as a substitutor. All these elements were discussed, but this angle and this approach has been missing, and I think that is the core for enabling policy, because the truth is that there is no successful industry, no brand new innovations helping us to get rid of fossil-based without healthy, sustainable European forests.
Thank you, and I want to come back on those enabling conditions to achieve that. If you say that's what we need to recognise, what does it mean in terms of enabling conditions? But Carl Anton, will you complete the picture for me in terms of how you see the past 5 years and where we've got to and the challenge ahead?
Well, in my opinion, the last 5 years were kind of overwhelming, to put it mildly. I think we had 84 initiatives by the EU concerning forestry, which is huge. If you think about that, it doesn't really have any forest competence in the first place. And coming from that, it's therefore all coming from conserving nature, from climate protection, but not really from an economic side, which is something we're really lacking. That's why we're also proposing the principal advisor idea in order to reinforce the forestry part. But I think it's very important going into the future is the implementation, maybe rethinking a few things. We share pretty much all of the goals of the Green Deal and Fit for 55 and the regulation that was put into motion. But the way it is supposed to be achieved is that just in many cases just not feasible for us. It's not practical and it's not realistic that it's going to be successful in that way. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to have a new dialogue and finding new ways to achieve those goals.
And when you talk about being practical, being realistic, what for you, when you look at this from a forest-based industries perspective, and we look particularly to the bioeconomy strategy, but also all these other elements, what for you are going to be the most important ingredients to make sure we have something that is, from your perspective, works towards those goals, but is achievable, is practical?
Well, from my perspective, obviously it's the forest owner's perspective, so it's in that case very much on the supply side. So we talked about LULUCF before. I don't want to reopen that entirely, but in Germany at the moment, if we stick to those goals, we have to reduce our supply by 30 to 40%, which is ridiculous if you think about it. So we have to reopen that. We have to look at the targets. It doesn't really make sense to put sector goals on forestry together with agriculture. We have to have young forests. We can't go for old growth forests all over Europe. We have to have replanting. So from that perspective, we mentioned EUDR. So just take that as an example for bureaucracy. We have to mobilize the forest owners to go into the forest, to manage their forest sustainable and not just stay at home and do nothing. And so we have to get the people out, and that's only going to work with freedoms, not with regulation.
I want to come back on how you mobilise them, as you say, to do it in a moment, and perhaps we can delve into that in more detail. But Paula, in terms of those enabling conditions that you talked about, to achieve the shift that you think is so important in focus now, what for you would be the key ingredients for a new strategy?
That you see and look at the forest and bioeconomy from the point of view that there are several roles, that it's not from the perspective of restricting, but it must enable and it must define what is sustainable biosource management, and that it is possible to use sustainably sourced biomass, because there is not the value chain without the raw material.
Thank you. Alexander, in terms of what all this means for a new strategy, and how do we avoid the mistakes of the past?
I think if we talk about new strategy, we have to really give guidelines. To give the industry, we need the industry for this kind of transformation, but we give them the guidelines to say this is the road, but to broaden a bit the road. So to give every company, to give every sector the possibility to develop this. Not everything has to be regulated till the last detail. We need place for innovation. And we talked before about monitoring. What industry tells me is that the departments within the industry for monitoring are bigger than for development. And that's not the way how we can get innovation. So really give the perspective that innovation makes sense. And also when we take a look to the future of financing, we will get a new proposal for MFF in the upcoming year. And every sector is calling for more money. Defense, agriculture, culture sector, all. And take a look to the national budget of the member states. It will be very hard discussion. So we need the private sector to develop a good bioeconomy strategy and to get them on board. And what they need to make private investments is a perspective, so they know that it will make sense to invest in these technologies, and not only technologies who works fine in laboratories, they have to be really make workable for everyone. That's what we need, and that's what we have to support.
Can I come back, Karl-Anton, on your point about mobilising forest owners? We have this conversation also when it comes to agriculture and to farmers. And how do you incentivise farmers who are struggling and forest owners, maybe smaller forest owners, who will struggle sometimes to make the investments to realise all this untapped potential? What for you is the key to mobilising them? And is it, and when we talk about incentives, what sort of incentives are really going to work?
I think it's important to say that from probably the majority of forest owners, forestry is not their first source of income. So if they have to have an incentive, it's plainly they have to have fun. They have to have a good feeling going outside to work. If they even have to do a whole lot of bureaucracy before they even start work, it's not going to work. And I think we all know in the forest sector that we have a huge challenge with the climate crisis coming towards us. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. I think that's the key point. If nobody knows what's going to happen and what trees, what species, what groups are going to survive or are the best for the future, it doesn't really make sense to regulate it into the last detail. We need a lot more freedom within sustainable forest management so that we can try, that we can fail, that we can go different ways, that we have diversification within forest management to see what happens. That's going to lead to innovation. And in the end, that's going to be the route to success. That the more tightly it's regulated, the less people are going to go out, work in the forest, and the higher the risk is if everybody does the same. So we need freedoms and diverse angles of forest management.
And that question of freedom brings us always back to the key question of a sweet spot, if you like, between regulation that provides the predictability, the clarity, the promise. I think Pep said earlier that we know the direction is set and we know where we're going, but also that flexibility that you're talking about. But Paula, I think you wanted to react on this mobilisation question.
Yes, because it's very important. We have lots of forest owners across Europe, and this is of course, economic incentives are always very important, but this is also a question of public discussion and the general atmosphere. How do they interpret that? What kind of behavior is encouraged? Is it okay to actively manage my forest, or do I need to leave it as it is? And we have the wrong perception that the forests that are just left aside would be resilient and healthy. That is a wrong perception. I mean, healthy and strong growth, it requires active management. Resilience also requires active management, and that is also important. That's why also we need to be able to mobilize the forest owners.
You wanted to jump in before I come to it?
Yeah, just what you just said regarding the boundaries, I just wanted to reiterate that we have those boundaries. We have them on a state level. So the question is, do we need new boundaries and a setting for these freedoms on the EU level, or are we back at that one size doesn't fit all approach? And we trust that the member states are able to set those boundaries for the specific.
But if the EU sets the overall objectives, then you have the potential for the scale up you need. So again, it's a sweet spot question, isn't it, Alexander, in terms of predictability versus flexibility and overarching objectives and what needs to be left to be done at the local level by member states working with forestry owners. How do you see getting those sweet spots right? And then I want to come back on the question of incentives, because we have a question from the audience.
I think what was done wrong started like that was that there was too less dialogue in the past 5 years. So there was a lot of legislation done within here in the European Union, but there was no dialogue with industry, with the forest owners, with the member states. And to be honest, the competence of forest is a competence of member states. And we have to respect that. And we have to make it workable also when it comes to topics, how can we make this combination with climate goals, but also using wood as biomass, as bioeconomy product. And this is what we need more. So really looking with industry, with member states, what is possible in your region, what is possible in your member states. And there are differences also within the European Union. This is what we have to do more. And then we bring them, so if we give everyone the feeling he's part of the deal, he's part of the strategy, he will invest, he will push forward his ideas. But I think this was not done perfectly in the past 5 years. So we make only big headlines here, but practically how to implement it. For example, when we talk about carbon removal certificates for forests, I cannot imagine how to implement it for my forest. There's still too much question marks, and even I was working on this file, to be honest.
If you want to react, I'll bring the mic to you.
No, to be honest, and this is not only a question I raise, a lot of people raise it up. So because there was no perfect dialogue. We just implemented some new legislation, but nobody knows how to implement it in real life, in the forest, our forest owners. It's not a possibility to reply.
Just jump out and give Alexandra a chance to react to that.
No, thank you, Alexander, for your comment. We're not doing alone this implementation work. We have hundreds of people who are gathering in our expert groups to indeed try to make this certification framework work as good as possible, so that you as forest owner or others can make the best out of it. So that was my last call. Help us to make the best out of it. Please.
But also, I also have some ideas on how to improve that dialogue in a structured way. Bear with me for a second, Paula. I just want to see, while I'm up and out here, did you want to write on that very specific point?
No.
No, okay. Any other questions from the room while I'm on my feet? Or let me go back and we will continue the conversation. You wanted to react on something else, Paula?
Yeah, we've been talking the whole morning about very important things that you are also referring to, and that is the coherence between the different policy sectors.
Yeah,
I mean, you asked earlier that what is the key ingredient in the new bioeconomy strategy. The key ingredient actually is that the approach and the principles would apply also the other legislation, that the industrial regulation and the climate policy and all these important policy areas are also introducing the enabling approach towards bioeconomy. That's the most important, because industry needs coherence. If left hand is not aware of what the right hand does, it's impossible to implement it. And then also predictability, because we are talking about huge amounts of investments, huge amounts of money. You need to have a long-term perspective.
And Alexandra, I'll ask you in a minute how we achieve that coherence. But Carl Anton, we also heard, I think it was Meta raised the issue of the cumulative impact of different pieces of legislation, but also a big plea, I know, from your sector for this extensive impact assessment, given the differences, and you've talked about this, in forests, in their characteristics. So to make sure when we have new EU legislation that we understand its effect, it doesn't have unintended consequences. How do you see that issue of consistency and coherency and how we really achieve it? Because you are affected by so many different pieces of legislation, some directly, some very indirectly.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I think the issue is that it's, since, as we said, there's no real EU competence, there's not one person we have to that we can talk to. Like if I'm in agriculture, I can go to DG Agri and make it a little easier than it is. But there's somebody you can go to. That's why we were pushing for that principal advisor for forestry, that we just have somebody where everything that concerns forestry has to go over his desk, that somebody is there who can check it, who has a forestry team with the know-how behind it, who can make assessments, impact assessment, rural assessments, who can see how do these work together, where do they contradict each other, just in order to harmonize the legislation to get that done. Because if that does not happen, it's just going to be incredibly difficult for us to work with it and even achieve like a bioeconomy. If on the one hand we have to reduce cutting, on the other hand we are supposed to have initiatives to mobilize it, on the other hand we should also have buildings, and it's not going to work if there's no harmonization in it.
So an open question, dialogue, yes, absolutely crucial, and Alexandra has made it clear when it comes to the certification framework who you need to be talking to, but bigger questions about who you need to be talking to, who they need to be talking to, you with both hats, when it comes to getting this consistency and coherence. For you, Alexander, as you face and look to a new bioeconomy strategy and all those other initiatives that we're hearing about, what for you is going to be key to genuine joined-up thinking here?
What is key? Not a professor who knows everything perfect, but
when you look at it from a perspective now as an MEP, as distinct from your other hat, what would you be looking for to make sure that we get the coherence that we're hearing a big plea for?
I think what we really need and do better is dialogue. To really listen to all sectors. I think it's always done, and you mentioned it, you try to do the best, but in the end also taking a look to election result. People don't feel the security. They vote for extreme left or vote for extreme right because they see no perspective. They only see some question marks and not results provided, or easy understandable results, because a lot of things we are doing here are extremely complicated and you cannot explain it to anyone. So we have to get also a bit simpler with our explanations with what we are doing. Nobody knows what LULUCF is, but in the end, people here, I'm not allowed to cut my tree anymore. This is the result. They don't know why. So really start more explaining, start more the dialogue, and also starting more right now implementing and not giving guidelines, but not so many new kind of legislations as we have done in the past few years.
Thank you. Just one question, which I think maybe you're best placed to answer, from someone in our audience saying tax reform, e.g. on fossil products, is key to bring the right incentives. What can we expect from member states? Tax reform, always a joyous subject at EU level. Is there any chance of it? Do you think that is part of what we need to be looking at?
It can be a part, but I think, to be honest, we cannot say that will solve the problem, because especially when we talk about tax matters, it's a competence of ministers for finance. And if we want to change anything, you need common sense with all member states. So I think it's very hard to make big steps at this part, like taxation of aviation fuel or something like that is like impossible. Take a look what ideas the Commission set up for own resources budget for the for our European budget and coming from taxations, but member states don't want to give up the competences for taxation or want to give any competences to the European Union. That's just a fact. We have to be realistic at this step.
I want to talk more broadly about moving beyond regulation and what is absolutely key. And I think Kirsten pointed to some of the issues. Our last panel pointed to some of them in terms of driving continuous innovation in a highly innovative sector like yours. What sort of elements? We have talked about public procurement a bit earlier, but we haven't talked so much about public-private partnerships and so on. But there is a question from the audience which says, how can we ensure the new bioeconomy strategy has real teeth and is impactful? The anonymous questioner, I always like when it's anonymous when they're saying something more controversial. The previous strategy, says the anonymous questioner, was good for gathering dust, but not much more. And someone else says, can we say that things are getting too complicated and stakeholders lack the knowledge to make educated decisions? And I'm thinking when we talk about what the EU can do and where you see a role, I'm wondering, Carl Anton, in terms of, for example, funding, for knowledge exchange, for joint research, where do you see potential, going beyond the whole debate about regulation, for the EU really to help this innovative sector to continue innovating?
I think the most important thing going forward with this is a very stable political field and framework. So a broad coalition within the parliament and over all parties that they have one line they want to follow. If it changes every 3, 4, 5 years, it's going to be devastating for our sector. Coming from the forest owner side, we need that stability. We need to know what's going to happen in the future, not next year or in 2 years. I think if that stability is given and trusted, let's put it that way, then I think funding is going to follow anywhere. If we have stability in the idea and the freedom to experiment, then I think innovation and money will follow.
And Paola, we talked about scale up a lot in the last session in terms of where the EU can help, particularly with research and innovation funding, but more broadly, to get that scale up, and whether you think there is a role for public money, EU money, to leverage the private money, because that's very much the thrust of how the EU thinks now about where you put the public funding.
For example, research and development work is an area where there can be very, very efficient public-private partnership, and EU has tools for financing that. That is also very important. But then you need piloting, you need demo facilities, etc. So this phase is very important, scaling up phase, and there we can certainly do also more together. And then creating markets, of course, to try to see that there is a competitive possibility also within Europe. And never forget that this industry is global. I mean, we are not only acting in Europe, but we are competing on the global scale, and that also needs to be taken into account. And then last but not least, to accept that for that we could have these innovations, for that we could use wood-based products and molecules in an innovating way, for that we could construct more of wood, we need to be able to take the tree from the forest. Replant, of course, take a good care and manage it sustainably, but it needs to be taken out of there. And this is also a very principal question, which is not always very certain in Europe or in our member states.
Alexander? In terms of where, going beyond the regulatory conversation that we're having, where else you think the EU can help, particularly in relation to this scale-up issue, particularly in relation to the use of public funding under Horizon Europe or its successor?
I think where we're really good is also taking a look to our universities, for example. There's a lot of research done, so we have to really scale it up. And we can use EU funds for it. we have to use them, but at one point we need the private sector also to really get it done in a really big way. It cannot be done everything public funded. But also maybe something was I was thinking when it's going to implement, because before there was the question on the tax matters where things can change, but also giving our governments, or I think our governments can also be a first runner at this point. For examples, we have a European Bauhaus, a project. So saying if we want to invest in new buildings like that, make it out of wood-based buildings. So giving them, for example, priority. The European Union, or just giving an example from my member state, Austria, we have a huge initiative right now making kindergarten. Because the age when they have to go is slowing down, so you need more space. So giving a better financing for wood-based buildings, for example, is something what member states can do, and you don't need a new legislation for this. And you support bioeconomy. Just one example. So one of these ideas, for example.
And the role of public funding in leveraging private investment. I mean, we do have currently public-private partnerships, the circular bio-based economy. Europe initiative has been very successful so far. Is that part of the way forward, and should we be doing more of that, do you think?
I think we have to continue it. To do it more is like you need more money.
Yeah.
And we cannot say if we will get more money for this. That will be decided in the next 2 years. But we need industry also as a big partner.
Yeah.
Otherwise it will not work. It cannot work only with public funding.
Indeed not.
This is the thing we have to realize.
Paula?
We are strong supporters of excellence-based financing, like within Horizon program, and therefore we definitely believe that we can be very competitive also within those financial frameworks when also this bioeconomy aspect is taking into account in there.
Question from the audience. Should we include KPIs, key performance indicators, in the new bioeconomy strategy to be able to see it delivered? Alexandra was talking earlier about monitoring and verification, and I've forgotten what the last one was. The VR, what am I missing? Reporting. Thank you very much. New acronym takes a while to sink in. But in terms of key performance indicators, is that something within the strategy we need to see more of? And I think I know what you're going to say. How do you set them? Who should set them? Should it be you guys who set them because you're there on the ground? Or is it something that can be done from above? Or again, is this something that needs to be part of that dialogue? Carl Anton, if we are to make it work, and I know you're begging for freedom here, but freedom within a global strategy, an EU strategy, do we need better ways of monitoring how well we're doing, where we need to? So I'm wondering if this is part of the answer to the where we get it wrong, we need to know we've got it wrong. How important will be that continuous monitoring to see what is happening?
Yeah, you kind of gave the answer already, to be honest. I think whenever you start a monitoring or a new monitoring, I think it has to be asked, is it really necessary to do it? Because monitoring isn't done by itself. People have to do it. We have to deliver whatever it is monitored, so numbers, figures, data, whatever. So yes, but in this case, it would probably make sense. Yes, and of course, you need to know if what you're proposing or implementing has the desired impact or not.
But be careful not to overdo it.
Yeah, the question is how far do you go and what do you need? Do you need it just on a state level, or do you want to know it onto every single village?
Yeah.
So it's always the balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in every strategy, you need a target and some kind of idea of what does the success look like. Is it called KPIs or something simpler?
Yeah.
That's another thing. The risk in all these indicators and also monitoring always is that, is it increasing the bureaucratic burden that the companies are having? Because that is a real headache already today. So we need to be able to look at it also from that angle. And then as for data and monitoring and how you count different things, it's always important that time frame is very often very crucial. You get completely different kind of calculation if you take it in very narrow and short term, or compared with the longer term. So, and time frame is usually a political decision. So we need to bear in mind that also this is not a precise science always, but it is based on the elements that you take to the calculation formula.
Thank you. Quick thought on that, if you would, Alexandra, and then I would like to, again, as we did with the last panel, identify a key way forward, a key next step.
A lot of things were what Paula supported. I mentioned we have to give the idea of we have a target, and when we have a street and saying this is the direction we want to go, and within the street you can work, and to develop goals or something like that, you have to reach in between. I think even if it comes to public funding, you have to check it at the point, But to develop these goals together, ask what is possible without too much bureaucracy, to take a look at, are you still on the right road or not? This is important, even if it comes to public funding, for example. Then we have to be sure that the money is used in the right way, and even to reach our goals. But to develop these goals together, this is I think the key element, and to respect what is in the competence of member states, how much data they have to provide, and to check it, and not, as I mentioned it, to make reporting over and over, and nobody's reading this kind of reports.
So of all the things we've talked about in the last 40 minutes or so, as we wrap up, if you wanted to highlight either a key next step at this pivotal moment in the cycle and we begin to prepare a new strategy, or a key ingredient for that strategy, of all the things you've talked about, what for you, Carl Anton, I come down the line the opposite way to I started, is the most crucial thing we need to do?
In my opinion, obviously starting at the root as a forest owner, it would definitely be just leeway within regulation, legislation to experiment and go from there. And that together with trust and sitting down together in a room, like restarting that dialogue that was somewhat missed the last couple of years. If we get that done, I think then I would be very hopeful for the future that we reach the goals we set.
Thank you, Paula.
Well, it has been mentioned that there are lots of concrete acts coming up. Please make sure that they are taking us to the same direction, the direction of prosperous and sustainable future for Europe.
Thank you. We come back at that point time and again. Alexander.
Yeah, let's say it a bit less is more, and give security for investing, for planning, and also from my side as member of the European Parliament, giving security with our legislation that what we will implement will be possible to reach and set up goals for a long-term vision. I think this is one of the key elements.
And above all else, what I heard from both panels is we need to talk. So events like this, debates like this, dialogue like this between forestry owners, with policymakers, people who have both hats at the same time. You can talk to yourself. Just occurred to me. Dialogue is crucial, and that's why events like today and having so many of you here and joining us online is so important. Will you join me before I give the floor back to Håkan in thanking our panel very much indeed? Thank you so much to you all. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to hand back to Håkan Buska to reflect a little bit on what we've heard and where we go from here.
Thank you. Building the bioeconomy that we have been talking and tried to figure out during these two panel discussions. And I will not repeat, of course, everything that was said. I will bore you with that. But I think it's very interesting to see, and I can really support that. If we should move the substitution further on, we need also to be able to scale things and find financing and a system for that. But I think also, being a main owner of Stora Enso, I think we need to also take some risks and develop things and move forward to show that we can do more with the tree fiber. So that's something we need to work on. It's very interesting to listen also to the other panel discussion about the regulations that put in rapidly speed during the pandemic. I think many of us tried to react, and we did put a lot of efforts. One reason is we're sitting here together, by the way, on the different angles on those regulations, and we see now it's hard to implement. And if we should be able to build the bioeconomy, it's all the restrictions are stopping us, and the lack of resources for the industry today. And bear in mind also that the import from Russia ended. So we are lacking a lot of supply also in the Nordic to that, and the cost of tree fiber have increased dramatically. That means also the investment return is going down. So we need to find new ways to find more profitable way of making new products. I have a small farm. I own some forest land. Privately, I own also agricultural land. For me, it's always in these discussions about forest land, and I'm a big supporter of biodiversity and taking care of the forest that we like to be in. But to harvest forest is not treated in the same way of harvest agricultural land. 1/3 of the budget in EU goes to agriculture land harvesting. And I think that's something we need to, I'm not after that we should be subsidized, but it also shows the different of angle how to treat the land and the forest land, that they are so big resource for us. So thank you, the panel members. I really joined the discussion, and Jackie, thank you for guiding us through all this. And all of you, thank you for taking your time to come here, and have a nice day. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Håkan, and thank you to the wonderful team that put today together. Thank you all very much, and have a safe journey back to wherever you're going.